It's the week ending Saturday the 11th of September, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen the Home Secretary authorising Border Force to turn back migrant boats, MPs voting for a rise in national insurance to fund social care, and the death of Girls Aloud singer Sarah Harding at the age of 39. But we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann. Let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the week's digital team is Kate Samuelson from The Week magazine, editor Theo Tait, and from The Economist science correspondent Alok Jha, who appears to have missed the memo about finding somewhere quiet to record. So apologies for some audio background noise throughout today's episode. What? A science story at the top of the running order? It must be something truly exceptional. Alok, what do you think this week should be remembered for?
This week marks the start of the most ambitious robotic pass the parcel you can ever think of.
We have completed our terrain relative navigation. Current speed is about 30 meters per second, altitude of about 300 meters off the surface of Mars. Touchdown confirmed. Perseverance safely on the surface of Mars, ready to begin seeking the sands of past life.
Some socially distant fist bumping there at NASA's Mission Control as the Perseverance Mars rover landed back in February. So, Alok, what's been happening this week?
The excitement you heard there was February when Perseverance landed. 7 months later, it's done one of its most important tasks, which is to drill a sample of Mars rock, seal it into a titanium tube, and then drop that tube onto the surface. This is the beginning of, it's going to be a 10-year mission to bring samples of Mars rock back to Earth. It's going to involve multiple spacecrafts, multiple launches, several space agencies. It's the most ambitious scientific experiment / space experiment ever conducted.
So usually when there's a space story and it's all a bit hypothetical, my approach is always like, oh yeah, but what does this mean to us? What does this mean to me living my life? Clearly, if there has been life on Mars, that is useful to know. I'm not going to question the excuse for this mission. But the practicalities of it are fascinating, aren't they? So 10 years, you reckon, until we see these rocks. How is that going to happen?
So it's really, really interesting to sort of go through the details of what's going to happen. First of all, why do you want to bring rocks back from Mars to Earth? I mean, we've got meteorites on Earth that are from Mars. We can study them. But if you want to look for life, then the meteorites are useless because they've been traveling through space for hundreds or maybe thousands of years, and they're irradiated, and anything biological would have been destroyed. So you don't know. So you need fresh Mars rocks. Now, one thing you can do is to send rovers over there, which is what Perseverance is doing. The Perseverance is crawling around, doing experiments on Mars, looking for samples of life. As much as scientists have got really good at sending stuff to Mars, it's really, really hard. And the kind of equipment you can get over there without breaking it is still not very sophisticated at all. So bringing them back to Earth, where we've got really sophisticated X-rays and MRI scanners and all sorts of other chemistry sets, that's really, really useful if you want to actually find fossils, for example, in the rocks, or even bacteria living there now.
Okay, so how are they doing it? How are these rocks coming back?
So what they're going to do is the first step is to drill cores that are interesting and seal them in these titanium tubes, which is what Perseverance just did this week, and then to drop that titanium tube onto the surface of Mars. And then what happens is that it broadcasts the location to an orbiting satellite, the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, which sort of records where it is on the surface. Perseverance will do this for the next few years. It will sort of distribute about 30 of these tubes over the surface. And then in about 2028, in just under a decade's time, the European Space Agency will send another mission to Mars containing a very small rover, like a very small version of Perseverance, which will then go land on Mars and zoom around with all the GPS coordinates of all of these different tubes. It'll be really, really fast. It'll pick them all up. And then once that rover has collected all of the tubes, it will rendezvous with another American-built spacecraft that's landed at the same time called the Mars Ascent Vehicle. This is basically a rocket that will be waiting on the surface of Mars that will rendezvous with this European Space Agency rover, collect up all these tubes, and then it will launch off the surface of Mars. Now, just pause for a moment there. That's the first ever spacecraft launch from another planet that humans have ever done. It's just which is going to be an incredible thing.
Yeah, incredible if it works, Kate. I mean, we're talking about international cooperation here between Europe and America. We're talking about rockets being launched from Mars. We're talking about rocks from Mars being launched back at Earth at a high speed. What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, the way you put it, it's definitely a complicated mission, and clearly a lot could go wrong. It's also worth noting that this isn't the only mission trying to bring back samples. China also successfully landed a rover called Zhurong on Mars this May, and it's extended its mission, but it's going to bring back a second lander in 2028 to eventually bring samples back from the red planet too. So there's a lot going on at the moment, lots of different countries kind of almost competing to see who can bring back samples first and who can analyse them and get the results the quickest.
It's kind of amazing though, Theo, isn't it, how efficient it theoretically is when robots do this stuff compared to all the jingoistic manned missions that governments like to launch. But the robots can talk to each other quite well, it seems.
Yeah, I think it is very impressive. I'm concerned in a sort of layway with the lack of multitasking involved in these things. I mean, the Perseverance rover cost, I think, 2.7 billion, and it can't even store the bloody samples itself. It has to drop them, and then you have to get another lander that has to go and get them. And similarly, I mean, I can see how you need ones doing ascent separately, but it just seems like there's a lot of bits in the chain, aren't there?
Wow, that sounds like the private sector speaking there, Alok. This is something that we've discussed before, isn't it? The commercial spaceflight now a reality. Could it be done more efficiently, do you think, by other people?
Well, look, so Theo, good point. Why can't Perseverance pick up these tubes and do the fetch the rover is meant to do in 2028? Well, a couple of reasons why. Perseverance is very specifically, the prime mission is to do experiments on Mars. The sample return thing is a sort of secondary thing, and it might not work. So you're going to spend $2 billion on landing something on Mars. You want it to do proper science straight off, and then these auxiliary missions are all nice to have. So its main thing is to do experiments right there and then. Also, when you send a rover to Mars, it has a very defined route of where it's going to go and what it's going to do and everything. By the time it gets to 2028, it might have A, run out of power because it's only got a certain amount of power, and B, it might be very, very far away from these tubes. So to send them back to collect everything might just be too difficult. It might be just cheaper to sort of send another rover over. And just one final thing, Mars missions take about 20 years to organise and plan and fund, and they're really expensive. And especially in America, NASA's budget is basically at the mercy of Congress every year, so things are always cancelled. So what they have to do is make sure that if you're going to run something in 10 or 15 or 20 years' time, you don't know if it's actually going to actually happen. So you just need to make sure that what you can achieve in a certain amount of time is still producing scientific results, and so ends up being a bit more expensive than just planning one thing and then being guaranteed that it will actually happen that way. If you were a trillionaire and wanted to fund a mission to sort of get stuff back from Mars, it might cost you a lot less and be a bit quicker, but you'd also take a lot more risks and it might fail. And NASA, unfortunately, is not allowed to fail because it's publicly funded. So it has to be a sort of belt and bootstrap sort of situation.
Yeah, and Kate, to answer my own question about manned missions versus the robots, perhaps the answer as to why there's still an emphasis on sending people into space rather than robots is that the public haven't really been carried along with this yet. I mean, I know we've got 10 years to hear the evidence, but it's not as romantic, is it, somehow, even though it is remarkable?
Yeah, I think obviously, the first time a person actually lands on Mars is maybe slightly more exciting than the first time rock is successfully collected from the surface of Mars. But at the same time, this has huge consequences for future human missions to Mars. Perseverance is looking at signs of past life through the rocks. The Ingenuity helicopter is scouting out routes for future missions. Perhaps one day that could include humans too. We know that Elon Musk and other billionaires involved in the space race are really keen to eventually get humans to Mars. And I think this is probably just one of the early steps, but nonetheless a really exciting and important one.
Theo, what do you think the benefits of this research might be? I mean, I know it's hard to know till we're actually looking at the rocks, but what do you think they could be?
With everything with Mars, as far as I understand it, it's all looking for life, isn't it? It's looking for the second genesis of life. outside of Earth, which is obviously incredibly exciting. And Mars is thought to be, in our solar system, the most promising place for it. And so, everything is about that. And actually, if we do get a rock back that proves, that life has existed in the past or even in the present, I suppose, then that would, in fact, probably be just as exciting as landing a human on Mars, wouldn't it?
And also maybe a bit unsurprising, Alok. I mean, obviously it's one thing to speculate, another thing to actually see the evidence. But if in 10 years' time they conclude that, yes, indeed, there was life on Mars, and a bit like the dinosaurs on Earth, it was eradicated millions of years ago, but it was there. It's not actually that surprising to know that, is it? That's what people suspect.
Mars is studied because it's close to us and we can send most instruments there. And so that's why it's the most studied. And 3.5 billion years ago, the Earth and Mars were pretty much identical planets in terms of the amount of water on the surface, the atmospheres, etc. Now, obviously, on Earth, myriad life forms are blooming, whereas on Mars, everything is dead. So if anything did evolve there, then it's dead now. So the question is why? Geologically, what happened? What's different about our planets? And is our planet going the same way as Mars? I mean, these are the kind of things that finding life there or not will tell you. Now, the other question that's really important about examining potential life on Mars is it the same life as the life on Earth? So life on Earth started in one or two places, and it's all related. Now, the question is it the same, literally the same stuff that's ended up on Mars or vice versa? Because Mars and Earth share rocks through asteroids and meteorites. So it's conceivable that some bit of life from Mars, life started on Mars and ends up on Earth, or vice versa. If it's not the same life, then that tells us something about life in the universe in general. At the moment, we just don't know how much life there is in the universe, if any. We've not found anything anywhere. If we found that life on Mars evolved completely independently of life on Earth, it would be remarkable. It would just mean that life is common. It would mean that complex life is common. It would mean that life more complex than ours is probably out there somewhere, given how many planets there are out there. And, we're starting to understand and measure planets in other solar systems in different parts of the galaxy. So knowing how likely these are to have life would be incredibly helpful.
And generally, all the reporting that I've read on the successful collection of the rock on Monday evening has been really positive. People seem really excited about what this means. But what I'm wondering is, and obviously I'm thinking way ahead because we're not going to be able to collect this till likely 2031, I think you said, Alok. I'm wondering whether there is any danger of studying these samples when we open them up from these sealed containers in a decade's time. I know that we'll primarily have rocks to look at, but also some of the samples will contain Martian air as well. Is there any health risk in terms of breathing that in or releasing that into our own atmosphere?
It seems that there are at least some people who are really worrying about this. There's actually a group called the International Committee Against Mars Sample Return who are worried that it could bring back viruses and or bacteria and that it would be impossible to contain. I mean, I think the plan is to take it immediately to a sort of Ebola-style biosecure place, but they are going to land it at 90 miles per hour in the Utah desert. So that's probably not the sort of absolutely ideal place to have your potentially dangerous samples to return. But what I don't understand is if there were viruses or bacteria, will Perseverance be able to tell that, or does it just simply not have the science stuff to tell that?
Well, I think Theo's answered the question about safety. Yeah, exactly. The samples returned to the middle of the desert in Utah, and then we put straight into a level 4 biosafety containment. Most scientists think that there won't be anything to worry about, but they'll do that just in case. That's what you use for the most harsh viruses on Earth. With regards Perseverance's toolkit, so what Perseverance can do, and it's the first mission ever to Mars that can do this, is to take very, very high resolution photographs of the rocks in front of it to look for essentially fossils. They can look for the form of fossilized life, whether that's bacterial fossils or some other more complex life. It can do that. And it can do experiments with its lasers. It can heat things up and do quick experiments with its various machines to look for some biomolecules. It can't do anything the level of sophistication that you can do on Earth, of course. Whereas before, if there was some fossil, then the best that the Mars experiments could do is to crush them up and say, there are some chemicals around that sort of indicate life, but we don't know if this is being caused by life. Perseverance can actually do it, look at these things properly and say, this potentially looks like a fossilized bit of life. I mean, that's exactly the kind of thing it would then take a sample of, put it into the titanium tube to send back to Earth for full analysis.
Okay, let's rock on. Theo, you're up next after this. Okay, Theo, your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Is it the week that the fight back against cookie banner terror began?
Everybody in Europe hates cookie banners.
Hold it.
Many people feel that cookie banners are where the GDPR went horribly wrong. But the problem is not the GDPR, it's crazy deceptive designs. Companies use every trick in the book to make you hit this accept button, claiming that that gives them the right to share your data with hundreds and sometimes thousands of companies.
A campaigner from the European Centre for Digital Rights demanding clearer rules around cookies back in May. Theo, before we proceed any further, actually, let's just do a quick 101 on cookies. We all accept them on a daily basis, I'm sure, but actually, what are they?
So cookies are small blocks of data that are placed on your computer when you visit websites. And some of them serve quite essential purposes like authentication. And the most notorious kind, the kind that cause problems, are third-party cookies, which aren't actually served up by the sites you visit, but by the networks and marketers and people that push ads to you when you're surfing the net. So they can track you for a long time and they can compile long-term records about your internet usage, and then they know what you're doing across multiple sites.
So, what has happened this week?
What's happened this week? Well, there's kind of an intervening bit, which is that obviously back in 2018, when the GDPR came out, all websites suddenly had to have these cookie consent banners, which supposedly allow you to agree the amount of cookies that are being used on a particular site. And everyone hates them. They are, in various ways, a total disaster. And what happened this week is that the UK's outgoing Information Commissioner, Elizabeth Denham, asked the G7 nations' tech regulators to join forces against cookie pop-ups online. Her plan is, which is also lots of other people's plans, is that instead of ticking a box every time you go into a website that you don't understand, she wants to allow people to set lasting privacy preferences of their own choosing on their browser or their computer, their device, and so that instead of having to do pop-ups every time you visit a website, you do it once a year or whenever you feel like changing it, so you can sit down and sensibly think about the pros and cons, and then, you know, people who are privacy conscious can go one way, people like me who could care less can go another, and, you know, it would just be a much better system.
Okay, and when you say they are in various ways a disaster, I'm quite pleased it's you, as the editor of the paper-based product at The Week, who I'm asking this of, because I think if I was asking Holden, who edits the website, it would be complex for him to provide an honest answer on this, because it's his revenue stream. But why do you think they're a disaster?
So the consent banners, they're meaningless in terms of consent because no one understands them. Even people who write the banners for a living admit they don't actually understand them, they don't read them, they just click through them. The other thing is that most of them are not even compliant with the law. Cornell did a study last year and they found that 11% of UK websites were minimally compliant with the EU laws on this. So, I mean, the whole thing is just completely meaningless. I mean, obviously it's a small thing and it's not big, but it's one of the EU's real mess-ups.
Okay, so, Kate, you can look at the scenario as it is now and say lots of people aren't happy having to click these endless banners about cookies and they don't even understand them when they do. But the intent behind the regulation was for us all to be able to manage our privacy settings, for us all to be more aware of what we're giving away. That's a good idea in principle, isn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely a good idea in principle, but the result is often having the opposite effect. Even privacy advocates think that, or some of them think that these cookie pop-ups actually sort of trick people into just accepting privacy invasions because they don't understand it or because they can't be bothered to read through pages and pages of settings on every single website they visit. Elizabeth Denham, who Theo mentioned, she talked about cookie fatigue, which is definitely something that I've experienced, which is just when people like me just click through yes, just to access the content that they want. And that leads people to give away more personal data than they'd like to.
Which isn't an accident, is it, Alok? I mean, these accept all cookies buttons are designed by people who are expert in consumer psychology to nudge you into accepting things, T's and C's that obviously you haven't read in detail, that might actually go further than before the GDPR regulations, when websites generally sort of obeyed a certain set of principles. They can now get your specific consent for all kinds of things, and you've not read it.
Well, it's just one step further along the spectrum of a lot of technology that we use where we have to sign terms and conditions. If you have agreed to the terms and conditions for your Apple iPhone or your Samsung or anything else, they are 40 pages long or even longer, and I've never literally read it ever. And there's probably all sorts of things in there that are worrying. I think that the cookies just extend that to all the websites. And I agree with you, it does come from a good place. But what you're kind of doing is shifting the responsibility of what is quite of a legal process into the minds of non-experts, which I think perhaps wasn't the intention of GDPR regulations, but certainly that's what's happened. And so it definitely needs a rethink.
And Theo, you mentioned that you sort of don't care. You don't mind being tracked. I think, on balance, I'm in the same boat. In principle, I think it's really important for everyone to have the autonomy to decide. But actually, I understand that I'm giving away my data. I understand that I'm getting advertised at. It might as well be targeted stuff. I don't really care.
Yes, absolutely. I'm in that camp. I don't think anyone is organised enough or I'm interesting enough for anyone to care about my information. But I do think it's very important, that nationally that people have very different attitudes. And the GDPR was mostly written by German lawyers, or this section of it was, and they are, for historical reasons, very careful about privacy. I think absolutely right that people should be allowed to exercise their views on this. And actually, I think the GDPR in general is rather a wonderful thing. This is only a very small part of it. The basic principles that our personal information should be used with our consent, that's wonderful. Privacy by design, that when you design websites, you should be thinking about privacy at the earlier stages. If the EU hadn't done this, there's no way that the Americans would have done this, and it has set a global standard, which is great. But it is sort of also overcomplex and badly designed in various ways.
But also, it's back to this thing of which government, Kate, is able, even the EU, with combined power of lots of developed governments, which government is actually able to stand up to Facebook and Google, who make money from targeted digital advertising based on users' data, ultimately, and say, you cannot do this anymore. That's their business model. They're the most powerful companies in Earth. They will find a way to continue doing this, won't they?
Yeah, but I think it's interesting that it's not a country that stood up to them, but in some ways Apple recently stood up to them in terms of the recent iPhone update. It was quite controversial, but earlier this year, Apple allowed iPhone users to block companies from tracking them across different websites by tapping a button in their settings. Basically, in other words, people now have to opt into having apps collecting their data rather than opting out, which is quite a big change. I mean, people with an iPhone have probably seen this when they're using an app for the first time. And Facebook in particular took real issue with this. It took out a lot of full-page newspaper ads which said things like, we're standing up to Apple for small businesses everywhere, kind of trying to take the view that they were standing up for these small businesses. But cynics pointed out that, the consequence was that Facebook felt threatened and they were standing up for the little guy because they make so much of their money from adverts, and that is probably what allows Facebook to not have to charge a subscription fee for people using it in the first place.
Okay, so Apple might be able to stand up to Google, but Alok, Google isn't going to stand up to Google, are they? But the most popular browser in the world is Chrome.
Yeah, so Google, of course, have an interest in maintaining cookies, and through Chrome can track all your browsing anyway, because that if you set up Chrome profiles and things. And the reason that Google, plus lots of other places, say that cookies and other things are a good thing is that it makes your browsing experience more useful. It makes it better in some way. And so I think that, perhaps that's the thread we should pull, which is that, look, if you're a tech company, I understand that some cookies are going to be important, and they might well improve my browsing experience by giving me much more targeted ads and things. I mean, I'm not interested in that personally, but some people might be. So why can't it be sort of pushed back on them to say, look, we assume privacy, but tech companies persuade me that this world is better, and then in that case, yeah, go for it. Take all my data, do what you want with it, and everything. The thing I suspect, and I can't prove, is that actually the browsing experience won't be very much different at all, and actually that it's weighted in favour of these companies, and by assuming that we're going to be private and not giving them data, it just takes away some of their revenue models, and they have to make more effort. And I think that that's the problem. However, if the rules are set up to favour consumers rather than these companies, I'm sure that the companies would adapt, and you probably would get a better privacy rating as a result. I kind of agree with Theo. This is a good law. It's just badly executed, and perhaps the next iteration of it is what we should be looking out for.
And do you think, Theo, you mentioned it was kind of basically because of Brexit that we're able to do this as Britain. Do you think that the EU might then look to modify GDPR based on what we've done here?
I mean, the EU is already aiming to change this particular thing on the cookie banners, that the e-privacy directives are going that way. I mean, the problem is, and the problem that everyone has, is that you basically have to take the entire ecosystem with you. You have to bring the regulators, because it's also transnational, you have to bring all the other regulators, you have to bring the tech companies, so that everyone's moving in the same direction, and it's going to be slow. I mean, even Google is saying that they were saying they wanted to end support for third-party cookies by next year, but then they've kind of backed off now and said it'll be by the end of 2023. As we've said, that is very central to this huge ecosystem that they make a lot of money out of. Let's be honest, the digital minister was saying a couple of weeks ago that we are going to sort this out. We in Britain are going to sort it out, and we're going to do it our way, and it's going to be great. And I don't know, I'm a bit sceptical about that, just because it is so international, and we've taken on the GDPR into British law because we know that very few things are as important commercially as having good data flow between us and the EU. It's apparently, there's 12 billion worth of business based on that. So, basically, we've got to do what the EU says.
Also, we're kind of an important country in the world, Kate, in terms of, our consumer base, but we're not the most important. And some US media organisations, for example, they say, don't they, when you go to their websites, essentially, we can't be bothered to jump through the hoops of GDPR at the moment, so you can't read our content in your country, sorry. I do wonder if Britain might put itself in a position where some of those big American companies, Chinese companies, etc., might just say, it's just not worth us trying to cater to this extra British thing we have to do.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, anything that we do, we might want to overhaul the whole GDPR requirements in this country, but we're really constrained by the need to offer a new regime that the EU and other countries deem adequate. Otherwise, data transfers between us and the rest of the world could be frozen. But it's difficult. I mean, as Theo mentioned, the Culture Secretary, Oliver Dowden, he's talked about setting a world-leading gold standard data regulation, but actually the details on that are just really vague and high level, and we don't really understand what that means right now. Does he have a plan for making these changes, or is it all just going to see how things go?
Okay, Kate, well, there will be another data transfer from you to the rest of the world after this. Kate, you're finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
The introduction of new guidelines to prevent sausage dogs from becoming too sausagey.
They've always been quite a niche dog, to be honest. But there's just more and more coming about. There's different types of them. You've got the standard, you've got the miniature, you've got the mini-mini. There's so many different,
Mel Maxwell McIlroy and some dogs in the background from the Northern Ireland Dachshund Lovers Facebook group speaking to the BBC in 2018. Kate, sausage dogs, your story of the week.
So dachshunds, or sausage dogs, which are known for their sausage-shaped bodies and really stubby legs, are getting too long and low to the ground. Well, that's at least according to the Kennel Club, which is the UK's largest non-profit organisation dedicated to the welfare of dogs. And they're also the organisation behind the dog show Crufts. So now the Kennel Club has changed its advice for breeders. This actually came into effect on Wednesday this week, saying that the dogs should no longer be bred with exaggerated features which make them look really cute. And instead, they should have what they called suitable ground clearance, which basically will help ensure that they don't suffer from back pain and other medical issues later in their lives.
Why? How does breeding them close to the ground, as you put it, affect these dogs medically?
So, according to the Royal Veterinary College, their quite extreme body shape makes all 6 varieties of dachshunds at risk of serious spinal and neurological issues, and often these require surgery to fix. The problems might not be immediately obvious or even obvious to the naked eye, but they can cause these dogs lifelong discomfort as well as really expensive treatment. Dachshunds dogs are 10 to 12 times higher than other breeds to suffer from invertebral disc disease, with at least a fifth of all of these dogs showing clinical signs at some point in their lives.
It's interesting, isn't it, Alok, that these guidelines are coming from the Kennel Club when some dog lovers see the Kennel Club and dog shows and crafts as the problem. The history of dog fancying, it sort of has its roots in Victorian eugenics, actually, which is not something fashionable to talk about in terms of people anymore. But when it comes to canines, it's still going on. It's like, can we refine this breed? Can we make it look the perfect example? And aesthetically, people like a lower stomach to the ground, but it's not done in the dog's interest, is it?
No, none of this is in the dog's interest at all. No breeding or any of that stuff is in the dog's interest at all. I don't really get dogs, if I'm honest with you. I don't understand why people want them or anything. I know that people love them, and I've seen some that I got on with, but I just think there's this genetic purification thing. That's not how nature works. You're supposed to mix your genes. You're supposed to be as widely mixed as possible. And purifying animals is only going to make that animal incapable of survival and have medical problems. There's not much more to say than that. But the other thing about dachshunds, by the way, maybe some dog lovers here can tell me, but is it true that dachshunds were bred? They're quite vicious, and so they're bred to be able to go into tunnels of tunneling animals like rabbits and badgers and things, and dig them out. Basically, that's what they're for, isn't it?
Well, Theo is our dachshund correspondent because you have a couple of them, I believe, Theo. So yeah, perhaps you can answer Alok's question.
My dogs are half dachshund for this very reason. I like dachshunds. Some of my best canine friends are dachshunds, but there's no denying that they have very serious health conditions, which is not what I would want personally. They were bred to hunt badgers primarily, but also other things, and they have these sort of small paddle-like feet that allow them to get in, dig, and attack these creatures. And this comes from a genetic condition called chondrodysplasia, which is a type of dwarfism, which means their limb bones harden early and their legs are stunted. So, as Alok was saying, this is it's basically canine eugenics. It's been going on since the mid-19th century. The fact that the Kennel Club has only just got round, basically, it could not be more damning. The fact that the British Veterinary Association is saying all these things, that they're all suffering these long-term things. If you buy a dachshund now, you have to have them genetically screened, or if you're sensible, you have to have them genetically screened for progressive retinal atrophy and various other conditions. You have to look at whether they've got signs of IVDD. The whole world of dog shows, dog shows are actually conformation shows. The idea is that the one that wins is the one that conforms to the correct characteristics, which are completely mad. So a basset hound should have a domed skull with an occipital bone prominent. Its eyes should be lozenge-shaped. Its tail should be well set on, rather long, strong at base, tapering, with a moderate amount of coarse hair underneath. It's pretty a crazy world, and it's not in the dog's interests.
Theo mentioned they're buying dachshunds, but the price of a puppy, it's worth noting. We've talked about pandemic pets before, but it has soared recently from around £970 apparently before the pandemic to nearly £2,000 today, according to the Dogs Trust. So people want dogs. People want this species of dogs in particular. Dare I say the reason might be Instagram?
Yeah, and the prices that you just quoted, it's mind-blowing to me. I'm like Alok, I'm not a massive dog person either, so the idea of spending £2,000 on a puppy blows my mind. But yeah, I do think social media is a factor in the popularity or the increasing popularity in dachshunds. Not only are they really cute, but they're also owned by a lot of big-name celebrities, Adele, the Kardashians, David Hockney, members of the royal family, some of whom then take to Instagram to share pictures of them. I feel like this kind of breeds a sense of dachshunds being a really desirable pet to own. Can
I just say, though, before we get too down on this, that I did spend a very pleasurable 5 minutes looking at #dachshund. Yeah. It is what I'd like the internet to be.
Yeah, I was interested to see how many times the hashtag has been used, and the simple dachshund hashtag has been used 16.7 million times. And then there's a whole kind of dachshunds of Instagram, I don't really know what to call it, club, which has got 8 million hashtags, but also it's got famous members of the community. There's Crusoe the Dachshund, who's got 826,000 followers, and according to its Instagram profile, at least, is a New York Times best-selling author. So I think this does feed into the idea of them being really desirable pets, and I also think it encourages this sense of wanting them to be as sausage-like as possible, having as longer bodies, as shorter legs, because unfortunately it does make them look cuter, and in turn that probably does lead to more likes and more kind of praise on the internet, and it is a bit of a vicious cycle.
What I just don't get is people who purport to love dogs and want these cuter breeds like this one, or bulldogs or whatever. They're destroying those animals. They're destroying those breeds. They're destroying this species, essentially. And bulldogs can't be born naturally now because people want them so cute that their jaws just don't fit down the birth canals of the pregnant dogs. And that's just got to be wrong. If you purport to love these animals, then why would you want an entire breed to go down that road, and sausage dogs to go down the same road? And natural selection will get you in the end, unfortunately. And I think that I'm anti-animal suffering. I think this is not good.
There's been a lot of reporting around the Kennel Club's guidelines, and they've definitely helped raise awareness of what is a really important issue and kind of putting it to the forefront. And I think it's definitely worth noting that breed registrations of flat-faced dogs like pugs and French bulldogs, which Alok mentioned earlier, who have really serious health conditions, that actually fell for the first time in 10 years last year. And a lot of people say that was the result of campaigning by animal welfare organisations, which raised awareness about the health issues. So by raising awareness of dangerous dachshund breeding and the issues that the dogs can face if they're too low to the ground, I think perhaps the Kennel Club is attempting to achieve the same thing, and it's definitely a step in the right direction.
Shall I put the other side to that quickly, which is that what they would say, the dog breeders, is that if you have a particular kind of breed, I mean, I'm not talking about the more extreme kinds of things that I was talking about earlier, but if you have a particular kind of breed, you can tell exactly what it's going to look like. And for instance, dachshunds often do look very sweet, and my half dachshunds do look objectively quite weird. Also, they claim that you can know what kind of temperament they're going to have a bit. I think that's more dubious, but there are certain kinds of dachshund characteristics, like they tend to be quite yappy. They tend to have a real sort of character. They are sort of wonderful little dogs. So I think the thing is that most people just don't realise how serious it is, and quite often they'll only discover it, sort of 3 years into their life with the dachshund, when it suddenly develops back problem because it's been walking up and down the stairs like a normal dog. I just don't think people realise how serious the situation is.
Did that hurt, Theo, to be objectively aesthetic about your own dogs?
I think they're amazing, but people do say, "What is that dog? I've never seen a dog like that before," when they see them.
What is it? What's the other half?
Morkie, which is Maltese Yorkie.
Okay. I'm sorry to make the problem worse, but I'd like to see a photo on social media, please. Otherwise it didn't happen.
Yeah, I can do that.
Well, please do. And I'm going to spend the rest of the week just exploring that hashtag, but it is a fascinating story, and thank you for bringing it to us, Kate. And thank you, Alok, as well, for your story too. Remember, you can follow this show for free. Just search for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts. I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Sophie King at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.